Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea Gronendijk de Vaux, and I'm the founder and CEO of Renard Group, a UK-based tech for good company active in the philanthropy sector. I'm also the ambassador for the Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce, the reason we are all here today, and of course, a keen supporter of equality, diversity, and inclusion in business and otherwise. This webinar is organized by the Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce in partnership with Accept Romania, the British Embassy Bucharest, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the Embassy of Sweden Bucharest. I'm very happy to be a part of this very important conversation today. I am Romanian and have lived both in Romania and abroad. We are still seeing significant discrimination against minorities such as the LGBTQ community and the Roma community. So yes, there is a lot of work to be done and businesses can be trailblazers in this field. Today, we're discussing what an increasingly diverse world means for companies in emerging markets. I have with me five great speakers. Sorry, actually more than five. Before we go on to my guests, a reminder that we have an option at the bottom of your screen for you to ask questions. Please do so and introduce yourselves when you do. About my speakers, we have Teodora Rossetti Ion Rotaru, Executive Director at Accept Romania. We have George Perlov, Executive Director, Open for Business. We have Ivan Jankovic, People and Culture Delivery Manager, IKEA SEE. We have Violeta Neniță, Country Manager, IKEA Romania. We have Claire Harvey, Global Inclusion Lead from Vodafone Group. We have Javier Leonor Vicente, Global Inclusion and Diversity Senior Manager, Pride Accenture, and Mihaela Davis from Accenture Romania. And last but not least, of course, we have Leonard Rizoiu, Managing Partner, Leo HR. Some of the topics we will be looking at today: choosing corporate ambassadors to drive an LGBTQ plus inclusive culture, visible leadership, the importance of allies and role models, protecting and progressing LGBTQ plus rights and inclusion, recruitment strategies for hiring LGBTQ plus talent, supporting and recognizing the role of employee networks. These are just some of the topics we will be looking at today. And having said that, please allow me to introduce Lestat Monroe, founder and board member of the Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce. Lestat, give us an overview before we go on to our guests. Where is Romania right now, and more specifically, Romanian businesses in terms of driving LGBTQ inclusion and rights forward?
Thank you, Andrea, for introducing the all speaker. Thank you for speaker for accepting to join us today. I think if I have to use one number that I've learned lately from George report, it's a dramatic number. Discrimination towards LGBTQ plus community in Romania cost us every year 3.5 billion euro. If the government doesn't take action, we, the companies, have that duty, that power to stand up and to raise our voice, to educate people, to bring awareness, to try to change things. This is the most important. But I prefer to let George a bit longer explain to us those numbers and how he come with it through his report. I don't want to take too long. I prefer to leave the speech to our admirable speakers that acceded to share their experience today, and I will come back to you for a later on conclusion.
Thank you for that, Lestat. Actually, before we go on to each speaker's topic, I would like to go once around the room and answer that question, because I'd like to have a baseline. Where is Romania right now in terms of LGBTQ rights, especially in business? Shall we start with Ivan?
Thank you, Andrea. If we speak about the LGBT plus inclusion, legal progress in achieving equal rights to LGBT plus individuals continues to be remarkably slow. And it's not just Romania, it's the whole region. Hostile narrative towards the community is also present. I think the culture is changing, the atmosphere is changing, and I really believe that the businesses, the companies have the obligation towards the societies that they operate in to make an effort to change the narrative.
Thank you for that, Ivan. Claire, You're based in London. We have a wonderful panel of a great mix of both speakers from Romania and international speakers, because we want to learn from that international experience. But if you've had a look at Romania, Claire, can you give us a bit of a general overview of where you think we are in terms of LGBTQ plus rights?
Yeah, definitely. So from what I've seen, kind of societally, but also with our wonderful colleagues in Vodafone Romania, you know, society is changing rapidly, as it is in most places in the world. And I would say our teams have always been passively supportive, but are now beginning that journey to move away from passive support to actively challenging inequality and discrimination and wanting to be seen to be part of that journey.
Wonderful, thank you. Leo?
I think the businesses in Romania are very reluctant right now, and the keyword should be that, because they are not very, most of them, they are not very embracing the diversity and inclusion. They are expecting from the headquarters or from the market signs in order to start this kind of procedures, designing processes and designing models to be implemented in the companies. So right now, I can feel the companies reluctant, but with small steps, we can see some very good examples, and we all know that started already in Romania, and for sure the future will be bright also in this.
Thank you for that. Talking about examples, I like to hear more of those from you. If someone's doing a really good job, we'd like to know about it and give them a shout out. Mihaela, do you want to weigh in a little bit?
I'll let Javier, our global Pride lead who joined the call to answer this question. Thank you. Over to you, Javier.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Michaela. No, I think a bit of what everyone has said already. I think that we are seeing companies stop being silent, and I think we have to start being more vocal. I think we've seen it also how governments are also more vocal about certain things happening also in Eastern Europe, close to us. I'm based in Amsterdam, by the way. And I think that we cannot, I mean, we are not a consumer company, so we don't really appeal to consumers. We work with companies, but you see how actually more consumer business are actually kind of align on the side of or, you know, being on the right side or being on the other side, I would say. And I think that we saw it, I don't know if you watched football, but yesterday on the stadium in Budapest, there were lots of companies with some ads who had some rainbow messages somewhere, maybe subtle, maybe not really in your face, some of them a bit, but I think there were lots of companies who were saying, you know, even though this is not something that we can talk about, we want to say we're here with you. So I think companies are taking a stand and are stopping being silent in that respect. Also in Romania.
Thank you for that. Theodora?
Well, I think this is a bit of a loaded question that is viewed very differently. You know, the answer can look very differently when you're part of civil society rather than the business world. And my only answer can be that businesses in Romania are often ahead of policymakers, which is actually great news for us as a community. On the other hand, many businesses are forced to create measures to ensure LGBT equality in a very hostile environment, in an environment where governmental policies make it more difficult to ensure equality than it should be. So I think, to just keep it brief, businesses are important allies that can build a critical mass of support around the LGBT community, and have been doing that for the past 5 or 6 years in Romania with baby steps, it's true. But for me, it's quite a pleasure to interact with people who have LGBT equality in mind when putting things on the agenda of policymakers.
Thank you for that. And George, we'll have a closer look at your study in a bit, but in a nutshell, can you give us an idea?
Thank you. My sense is that it's really at an early stage, as people have talked about before. I think the multinationals are generally doing something. I know groups like Accenture are probably at the forefront from our discussions in Romania. but there's definitely a room for a lot more, not only at the multinational level, but at the SME level as well. And I think we'd love to find more partners and more active companies that are interested in doing that kind of speaking out at that level of smaller local companies.
Thank you for that. We have a baseline now. Let's go straight into the topics of our webinar. I'll start with Javier because if I understood correctly, he has to leave quite soon. Thank you for joining us anyway, Javier. We very much appreciate it. We love having you here. Your topic, capturing data and building trust to better understand your LGBTQ plus employees and show progress. Shall we start with that and then we go on to your other topics?
I can share my screen, right? I'm just checking.
Yeah.
Can I do that?
Yes.
Because I think, I cannot. Could you please make me, if I could, otherwise I can just talk about it. But let me see, let's try it again. No, I cannot.
If you give us 1 second, then
we should
be
sure.
able to start.
No, so we have two main tools that we use for measuring our progress in terms of LGBT inclusion. And I want to talk about, and I think, an image is also better than that, but basically we have what we call self-ID, which I think many of you may be familiar, is basically a tool in which employees can go to an online tool and identify themselves as, this is my gender identity, this is my sexual orientation. We also have that for ethnicity. We also have that for some kind of disability that you may have. So basically it's not only for LGBT, but it's for the whole bunch of employees that would like to, tell us how they are. Let me see if I can share now. No, I cannot. And the other thing that we have, so for example, in that tool, we have seen, and I'm talking about global numbers now, that, from everyone that has identified themselves on the global scale, around 25% of those employees are actually bisexual, which is something that we were not aware of. So basically, it's kind of an interesting item for us to work on and to make sure that, how are we inclusive for bisexual colleagues? Are we inclusive or not? Then obviously one of the largest groups was always the gay men. We had around 45%, if I'm not mistaken. And then we would have some kind of maybe 18 or 20% of lesbian women. And then some of the, transgender would be some other places as well. So you see that actually the numbers help because what gets measured gets managed. So now that we have the data for how many people do we have for certain categories, if I can say categories, sorry for that, then we can see if those people are growing or are stable or we are losing them. If we are losing them, we are doing something wrong. If we are kind of stable, then we are okay. And if we are getting more of those people, that basically means that we are doing something good. The average population, LGBT population in the world, there are many studies. One I heard we are 8%. Last week I had another one from the US in which they say that the new generation of, I think it's called Z, but I'm not really sure, is actually 35% of the people in that generation identified as something else than straight. So basically that you can imagine.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
You can now share your screen if that helps.
Yeah, I can share the screen. Yeah, perfect. So let me go to the data because I think that's interesting. So here we are. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Let me make you disappear. I'll go into this one. So self-ID, this is some of the data that we have. And again, this is all data that is generic. It's not from a country. It's just in all those things. So you see we have already, we said here, the numbers are a bit not correct, but you see bisexual 25%, gay 39%. Then we have male, we have non-binary or something like that. So basically you can see all those things that we have. And the second thing that I want to talk to you is the Pride scorecard that we have. Every 6 months, we measure how the Accenture countries perform in terms of inclusion, in this case, LGBT. So there are 4 areas that we monitor: inclusive culture and workplace, external engagement, like what we're doing now, basically, talking to other people than Accenture, leadership and talent. And this is basically how the leadership and talent is in Romania, how the inclusive culture is in Romania. We are not measuring the country Romania, but we're measuring Accenture Romania. And here we have some of the questions that we ask our HR people in the countries every 6 months. Is the country lead supportive? Is the country boss or of Accenture, is he or she supportive of LGBT? Are they vocal about it? Do we have any leaders who are LGBT, who are out? Do we have a sponsor for the network? Do we have a network? How much % of the people are actually allies? I don't know if you know, but we have an ally program in Accenture, and you can wear this in the office, or you can have the background that I have on a meeting, and then you show that you're supported for the community. This is about leadership. We have other ones about external engagement as well. Have you received external recognition? Has someone outside Accenture told us that we are doing something good? Are you a member of organizations, like in this case, for example, the Chamber? Have you hosted external events like this one that we are participating in as well? Then we have talent, which is, do you promote the self-ID program? Do you have Pride mentoring, which is basically linking people who are more, let's say, LGBTQ savvy, or people who are not, trying to educate each other? Do you have recruitment focused on LGBT as well? And then the culture part, which is the biggest one. Do you host LGBTQ activities in the country? How much a percent of allies do you have compared to your workforce? Do you have benefits that are inclusive, available to everyone, married or unmarried couples? Do you offer transgender health benefits? Do you have not gender policies? Are you talking about father or mother, or are you talking about parents, for example? The language is also important. Do you have all gender bathrooms? Are people wearing this in the office? And then the last question is a bit of an internal one, because we have a training for leadership for LGBT leadership, which is called L3, LGBTQ Leaders Learning, 3 times L. That's why the L3. And this is basically the ranking that we make every 6 months. Here you see an old one, so the data has been, already outdated because we have 2 new versions. But you see, actually, in terms of Accenture, these are our top countries. So UK is the best, Australia, United States, Ireland. You see the list there. But the funny thing is, I'm based in the Netherlands. I'm based in Amsterdam, which is supposed to be like an LGBTQ paradise. But you don't see it on the list. That basically means that Accenture, the Netherlands, is not doing as much as Accenture, for example, Austria or Spain or New Zealand or Mexico. So that's the way we measure it. And we go even further, and we have even a map that we make so we can see how people are scoring. And you see on the vertical axis, you see leadership and talent, here on the axis. And on this one, you see culture and external engagement. So we can see how countries are scoring in terms of, for example, how are they in culture. You can see, for example, that Romania is here, so actually it's very equal in terms of how they score on leadership and talent, and how they're scoring on culture, external engagement. This is an old version. Michaela, don't kill me, because I'm sure you're more to the right already, but this is an old version that I could share. So you see, actually, you can tell countries, for example, like Switzerland, you're doing fantastically on leadership and talent, but you need to improve on the other one. So kind of give every 6 months 3 pieces of advice per country, in which we tell them you could work on this, this, and that. And then after 6 months, we were going to check if they're working on that, or if maybe things are going better or not. And then sometimes you see that countries, for example, like Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, they are LGBT paradises in terms of population, but in terms of Accenture, for example, they still have a bit of work to do, because actually you see that Portugal or Belgium or other ones are actually much ahead of those ones. I think that was it. Any other questions before because I don't know, I talked too fast. I don't know if there's any questions or anything that I missed.
No, that's good. You did mention self-ID. I would like to get a bit more details on that. How do you encourage that? How do people react to it? I'm sure you've had so many conversations with people who have to go through that process, and I assume, especially in countries such as Romania, it's still not an easy process. It takes its toll on the person who decides, I want to be my full self at work, but here are all the challenges. So I'd like to hear about some of those challenges, how people have reacted, how managers have managed those situations, any good practices, any advice, any mistakes you've noticed, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, to myself, I think it's very challenging from a legal perspective, because the law in Europe, GDPR, doesn't allow us to ask these questions. So basically, we have to find workarounds, and in some countries, we go as far as you can actually link this to the employee record. So I can say that John in New York answered, I am gay, or Mary in, let's say, Australia answered, she's a lesbian. I can go as far as that, but I think how to promote it. What we have to make sure is that we always respect the law, the GDPR law in Europe, which is challenging, but there are ways to navigate that. And for example, in some places we have had to have like an offline survey or questionnaire that we do every year or every so many months, because we cannot actually do that from the SAP or from the Workday system that we have for employee records. So you have to navigate that. And in terms of promoting this, I always say that it's really useful to have self-ID data, because, for example, I know now in which countries we have the majority of our transgender colleagues. So I know now that in the top 5 countries with most transgender colleagues, 4 of them we offer the benefits that we want to offer, but in 1 of them we don't. So now I'm working with the local team in that country to make sure that we find a partner, an insurance company, and we kind of make the program so that in a couple of months, hopefully, we can offer transgender benefits. And that would include counseling, hormones, and any kind of affirming surgery that they would need. Without self-ID, I could not do that. I could not know where to work. I mean, you can imagine you work in the biggest country, because you have more population, but sometimes you would be surprised. Another thing is, for example, what I said about the bisexual colleagues. I don't know how many companies here do something for bisexual inclusion, but we don't do so many things, or not so many things until we found the data. So basically, all these things kind of opens your eyes, and don't forget that this is just a picture in time, a moment in time. But in 6 months, we have a new picture, and we can see if bisexuals are 30 instead of 25. That means basically that we are doing the right thing. If we have, for example, less and less lesbian people, then we know that we have to make sure that we work on that one. So I think what I said, what gets measured gets managed. If we don't have the data, we don't know how we're doing. We are kind of doing things blind because we hope to do the right thing, but you never know. And this data is always a bit of looking back what we have. So I think it helps us navigate our programs a bit better. Also, in terms of leadership, with the new, I mean, I didn't show this graphic, but in the new graphic that we have, I can see the level of seniority of the employees. So I can see if they are a managing director, which is the highest level in Accenture, or if they're an analyst, which is the lowest level. So if we don't have enough people on the senior levels, that basically means that we have some work to do as well. So there's lots of insights that we can gain to kind of manage and see where we have to focus. I don't know if I answered your question, Andrea.
You have, and GDPR notwithstanding, do you feel that people are willing to share this kind of information? Again, in a country such as Romania, where we know, we're still in the infancy. Do you feel that people are ready to share this kind of information with their employer?
I think it's always tricky. I mean, I'm gay myself, so trying to, I would have no problem by doing that, but I would like to know that it's only going to be used for this. That is not going to be any records. That's what we have to be careful with information. I think that is a very personal choice, and if you explain to people why you need this, then I think they understand. And I think it's always a personal choice. If I can say, the usage of self-ID, we have it already since 5 years, I think 5 years. And it was like 1% of the population would use it. And I think now we're at 6% globally or something like that. So you see that it takes a while to pick up. And if you do it in the context of, for example, not only LGBT, but just, for example, if you have any disability, or if you have another gender expression, or if you have any ethnicity, if you're Black, or if you're Asian, or if you have any other thing that you want to disclose to the company, like, being deaf or anything, I think then it becomes a bit of a whole program in which we try to make sure that the employee is well taken care of. And that is what is. I think if you present it only for LGBT, it could be a bit strange, because then why would you want to know that, and what are you going to do with it? But if you present it as a whole in the kind of the employee program, there's one slide that I haven't showed, which I could do that because I'm sharing now. So let me see. I think, why do we do this? What we do, because we want the employees to feel seen, safe, connected, and then confident of courageous. So, and I think we do this for the employees. We don't do it for ourselves. We don't want to know if you're gay or you're lesbian, or if you have any other gender identity that I can, that I can do something with. We want to make sure that the employee is not only seen and part of the company, but actually that the company belongs to them as well. So, so that's why we do it. So I think you have to explain the message, but usually when you do, then people get it. At least that's my experience. You have to explain it, that's for sure. If you send an email, it will not happen, but you have to kind of get the message across.
Okay, and if you were to set up such a program in Romania, again, sort of putting GDPR to the side, let's say in a market that's just getting started with this, what are some of the things you may be looking at to make people feel comfortable? What are the training? What's the training you would give to managers in a country like this to allow people to feel comfortable sharing such personal information? Where should we start?
I think we start with explaining how secure the system is. In the system that we have, you cannot trace who answered what. So basically explain the security mechanisms of that. And then I would say, it all starts from the top, to be honest. We have to get the senior leadership in the country to say, this is a tool that is going to help us make a better program. And I recommend it because of that. But there's one other thing. In Europe, all this information has to be collected on a voluntary basis. So basically, we cannot force people and we cannot push people to do this, and we don't. So basically, you get an email every year or something like that saying this is your chance to do this. You could do that any time of the year. Basically, the tool is online, but we don't want to push because the law says that you cannot push the employee to answer something, even if he's trying to help the employee to feel more at home. So I think I would say communication. That's what you have to see, and try to have maybe a workshop to explain what this is and how it works and why this is useful. yeah, that's, I would say, communication about it, and do not be scared if you get little response, because 5 years back we got what I said, we had almost no one responding to this, and only in a few countries, and now we cover, I think if I'm not mistaken, we cover 82% of our employees with this. So it's, you know, it's kind of a widely used tool, and it still is, you know, it's not everyone uses it, so we still have to promote it, and you know, it's an ongoing effort.
If I could just add to that, Andrea, because we also use it, but we do use it in our personnel system, actually, even though it is, as Javier said, it's completely anonymous. We can't ever connect it back to a person, but we wanted to be able to not do it anonymously. We want to be able to look at equal pay and progression and those kind of things, which you can't do if it's an anonymous survey. And actually, we're at just over 30% of the population have given it, including 5% of our Romanian colleagues, which I think is really, really good. But it does take time, and it takes personal stories. But I also think what it takes is two other things. One is helping people see what you'll do with the data. So rather than just talking about what it is, actually let people see how you'll use the data and what it would look like. And then the second thing, I think, coming back to why we're here today, the more we can, as businesses, big or small, do this collectively and talk about what we're doing together, it makes people feel like they're not the only one in the country, and you know, ours isn't the only company asking this, but actually other colleagues in other organizations are as well, and we can take the learning from us big organizations and give it to some of the smaller organizations as well. I think that will really fast track progress.
Claire, and when you say how we use the data, can you give some examples of good practices of programs or things you've done in the company to show people that they have been seen? And Javier, you know, explained that's the first thing, right? People want to be seen. Some of the things you've done to show the people how their data has made a positive impact on the company and their working environment.
Yeah, so two really simple examples. One is in our, we have a annual engagement survey that we also ask the data in anonymously, and then we cut that data by demographics. And what we found was our LGBT community and our people of color. So we have what we called REACH, race, ethnicity and cultural heritage strategy. We found that those groups particularly were really lacked confidence around our ability to challenge situations. So they didn't feel confident to speak up if there was an issue. So we absolutely changed our systems. So now we realized that when we looked into the system, there wasn't really a good way of tracking outcomes of complaints, and there was no way of seeing what complaints were related to inclusion or exclusion. So we've now changed that, and we now have a tracking system where we can start to feed back to people. This is the complaints that we've had, obviously not the details, but this is what's happened to raise confidence. And we also use that as a focus group to talk to people about why. And as a result of that, we're now training our investigators into LGBT inclusion, into race fluency, so that they're really coming at the investigation with confidence that they know the area that they're talking about. The other example, really simply, is about progression. If looking at parts of the organization and saying this group of people are not progressing as quickly as everybody else, and therefore there might be a barrier. So creating initiatives through training manager and through looking at progression to make sure that we're evening out those progression routes.
Thank you so much, Claire. I'll now go to George Perlov of Open for Business, because he has a brilliant, very interesting report. I'd like to hear about the results and the economic case for LGBTQ+ inclusion in the workplace. George, over to you.
Great. I'm going to share my slides, just a couple. Don't worry. Here we go. And I'll put that in to slideshow. Great. Anyway, thank you to everyone for organizing this, especially to our dear friend Lestat and to Theo, who I've had the luck to work with, and also with Ella and a number of others, and Javier supports us on our coalition partner. So thank you all. And I think this is great that we're doing this, and happy Pride, most importantly, to everyone. I know we're getting into the last days here, so it's nice to still say that. I'll just talk for a second about Open for Business, and then I will talk about our report and data and some of the what we think are the issues that need to be addressed, and then where the opportunities are. So Open for Business is a coalition of 39 companies, multinational companies across the world, who really believe in the power of business action for LGBT rights. And what Open for Business has done over the years is a number of research reports on a variety of topics that relate to the economic and business situation for LGBT people. And we've done this globally, we've done this regionally, and on specific topics such as marriage equality issues and what that means economically, but also looking at the role of employees who move around the world, and what they need to learn, especially if they're LGBT, and what the opportunities are for them. And we were very lucky to be funded by Google and Equality Without Borders to do this report in Central and Eastern Europe. And I'll talk you through this report, which we did and launched at the end of April at the European Union level, and then again in each of the 4 countries where we worked, that are Romania, Ukraine, Poland, and Hungary. And probably the biggest finding from the report is that the cost of LGBT discrimination that we estimate is from 0.23% to 1.75% annual GDP. And that's a big number. And that 1.75% is actually the Romanian number. And that reflects, I believe it is 17.6 leu per year. So we're really talking about a very large number. In actual terms, that amount is how much the Romanian government spends on the health ministry. So you get a sense that this is a big number. And where do we get our numbers from? You're probably asking. It's 2 sources. It's health inequities and also in wage gap data. And the health gap is really in the area of depression and HIV, which we know affect the LGBT community disproportionately. And the wage gap we've estimated based on data that we've seen in the UK and Germany of what this is costing the society. And these are the things we can measure. And again, we've heard a little bit from Javier before this, and Andrea too, about, we can measure what you can measure. And these are things we can measure, but we also know, for example, there's reputation issues. For example, the European Medicines Agency, when they moved offices from London to Amsterdam because of Brexit, did a survey of their employees beforehand, and they asked them where, what places would they be interested in moving in the EU. And 70% said they would leave the organization and not move with the organization if the organization moved to Bucharest or Warsaw, just to give an example. So there's a reputation issue that's going on. The people, that skilled workers and creative workers and workers of the future don't want to move to the region. And I think that's a very big issue that also has economic implications. And also the fact, we looked at some data from the World Bank and LinkedIn that showed that really these jobs of the future, Romania, I know, has suffered from a brain drain issue for many years. I think it's the 2nd highest country in the world in terms of people leaving to pursue their careers outside of the country. And we see that, especially in these jobs of the future, jobs in technology, finance, communications, and science. These are moving out of the region, and the people who are coming into the region are coming from countries that are less open and less diverse. So it's really sort of telling that there's some issues here that do need to be addressed, because there is a financial implication in the discrimination against LGBT people. We definitely see that. On the positive side, though, you see a chart here that has a number of charts included in it, and these all correlate LGBT rights in countries across the world with economic data. And what we see is a very, very strong correlation between 48 and 67% in all of these. And that basically what it's telling us is that countries that are more open and diverse, that have good rights available for LGBT people, are going to do better financially. So we see that from the World Economic Forum's competitiveness index, the ease of doing business index, which shows which countries are easier to do business in, the innovation index. These are the drivers of competitiveness and innovation, as we know, are the drivers of economies. And if we see that there's an LGBT link to this, it really makes a lot of sense. And then lastly is the per capita GDP. And we did a regression analysis of this data, and we saw that if there was just a 10% increase in LGBT rights, that's associated with a 3,100 euro per capita gain. So just think about that Romania could be that much richer if it enacted partnership laws, or if it got rid of some other more discriminatory laws in the country. So we definitely see that there's this builds, this kind of openness builds. We're also just very excited in the report. We did mention there's an interesting case study about Ireland, which I think you'd find interesting, in that looking at how Ireland looked at the marriage equality referendum there a few years back. And there it was definitely because the business community came out and said, what, we support this, and what message would this send the world if we didn't move forward on this, So I think that's, and there's, I guess Ireland is a very different country than Romania or these three other countries we studied, but both come from, strong traditional religious values. Also, at the time, conservative government. They're all in the European Parliament. These are all EPP members who were running the business, running the country at the time, Enda Kenny. So there's definitely parallels, and also a lot of multinationals that we know that are operating in the region. So I think that there's some hope, I think, here, and I think the more that we can get companies to come together and talk and act, I think we're going to see some action. And I know most of you have been following. I'm not going to talk about Hungary specifically, but most of you I know have been following what's been going on there. And we've seen that this latest legislation has really pulled companies out, and companies that were a little quieter on these issues are starting to say, we do need to speak out. This is important for our country, and they're afraid of that. This is the slippery slope down to a Russian style environment. So I think that I know sometimes it has to take something like that, but we hope that it doesn't have to go to that level in Romania before companies will start to fill in. And I know the government has been in Romania, Teo will talk more about it, has been mostly inactive. But I think, the more that we can get companies to strongly support this work, I think the stronger, an impact will be, and that companies like to work together. We realize that's also part of what we learned from Open for Business, is that there is a, we're in it together kind of mentality. And when one company sees others doing similar kind of work, they're going to jump in and want to be part of it. So we're cautiously optimistic that this kind of attitude and beliefs from companies are spreading in the region. So I'll leave it there.
Well, you were also, we're very keen to hear about the channels of influence that company can use to increase LGBTQ inclusion. And when we look at these numbers, how do you truly make companies aware of the losses they're actually seeing by not being open to this incredible talent pool of people? How do you get them to understand that they could be doing so much better if only they were actually paying more attention to this untapped talent pool? And one more thing, we have a lot of attendees. There's a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for our speakers, kindly put your question in there, telling us who you are, and we'll try to work your question into the conversation. Thank you. Back to you, George.
No, thank you for that. And I guess I just to point out that Channels of Influence, which is another Open for Business report, and I'll put the links to these in the chat in a minute. That's a great segue because that's really what companies can do, and that's looking at, from a lobbying perspective, what can you do from a supply chain perspective? What can you do in terms of civil society? What can you do? And I think, we know, and Theo will certainly attest to this, that when companies do reach out and partner with civil society meaningfully, they really do learn, and there is a two-way street there that companies gain and the CSO and the CSOs can gain as well. So there's a number of ways that that companies can get more involved. And just also, I think just by having a very strong D&I program, and we saw that again in Ireland, is that the Glen, the national organization there, had done a really good job of working with companies so that when it came time for this referendum, the companies were ready to say, yes, we'll help you advocate. And I think advocacy, obviously, as we know, is probably the hardest thing to do, and especially in countries where the political situations are challenging. I think companies tend to be risk averse, and we want to help them take we don't think is a risk here, but to take an action that we think can help move equal rights forward. So thank you.
And are companies willing to understand that their biases against certain people could potentially be costing them money, or could be sort of stifling their growth?
I think most companies, the multinationals we know, realize that there's a power in diversity overall, and that LGBT people are a part of that. I think what we find, though, and also our research showed this as well, is that when you looked at different groups, and I'll tell you a little aside here, when we were looking to do the research for this report, and we were talking to a number of research companies in the region, the companies all said to us, well, if this is going to be a survey about LGBT issues, no one's going to take it. So I think that just gives you a sense of the environment. And so we broadened the survey to look at a number of groups, including women, older workers, Roma, people with disabilities, etc. But consistently, I think LGBT people are sort of, at that bottom of the list in terms of where's their priority and what actions are being taken. So I think there's definitely room for improvement there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, George. I shall like to talk more about this talent pool when I get to Leo. So that's another one for Leo to put on his list. But I would like to, I want to go to Claire now, because we're talking about moving businesses forward. And I think it's a good moment for us to talk about the importance of leadership and role models in this context. So Claire, can you tell us a little bit about that from your experience?
Yeah, I think what's really important, and I'm not going to disagree with George at all, but I think what's really important is that we kind of stop thinking about individual strands, because what we can very quickly do is create a kind of pecking order or a hierarchy. And actually, where we've had most traction is when we stop encouraging people to manage diversity and instead practice inclusion. And if we build inclusion into our leadership and our systems and our structures, it benefits everybody, as opposed to we're going to do this for the LGBT community, this for the women, this for the disabled people, where people get a sense of almost, if I give inclusion to one group, I've got to take it away from another. And the reality is, I'm a gay disabled woman. I don't fit neatly into any of those boxes. So I think that's helped us, because also people can think about what would inclusion look like for them, rather than perhaps for people that they've never met or never known that they've met. I think senior leadership is really important, and embedding it into your expectations of an organization. So moving away from inclusion is the nice to have that people can do if they want to. I'm not a fan of the kind of ally schemes where people wear lanyards, because for me, an ally is an action. It isn't a noun. You're an ally by what you do every day, as opposed to whether you wear a badge or not. So really embedding it into expectations and rewarding the right behavior. I'm a psychologist, so we have a model of how to embed inclusion, which is, do we give people the right behaviors? So, in a country like Romania, where these conversations are not often had and are only beginning to be had, do we give people the safe space to ask questions and learn and think about what that means? But then importantly, as an organization, do we have the systems that enable those behaviors to be used? And then do we reward those behaviors rather than see it as one or two people being inclusive and championing it and everyone else not? And that's kind of the route that we're going on, and seeing a lot of traction in that space.
You talked about the positive behavior. What about the negative one? How do you tackle the unconscious bias? How do you tackle full-on discrimination? It's such a it's sometimes so difficult to pinpoint, isn't it? It's not always out in the open. So how do you work around that?
So we very much take the view that the culture of any organization is based on the lowest behavior that you'll tolerate. And so, we have to have really clear systems and structures around what's acceptable and what's not, but also recognizing that, in the main, gone are those days where people are running down the road shouting really offensive terms. Discrimination in the workplace is much more subtle and much more kind of insidious than that. So we have to absolutely deal with that. On the first line, we deal with it on 3 levels. On the first line, setting out clear expectations. So in our induction, in every part of our leadership training, in our wider organization, we have both support. So we have what we call a withstander program, which is all about how everyone's responsibility is to challenge discrimination and inappropriate behavior. But then we also have training around what to do in those circumstances. We then have obviously very clear systems and structures for managing that on the first time based on education, but then a very clear expectation of the values of our organization, and people who aren't living our values, no matter how good a performer that they are, living our values is as important as performing well. So we will move those people on. And you have to do that. You have to have those difficult conversations.
And in a country such as Romania, what would you see as the main challenges? Because, for example, you say, yeah, long are the days of people running around the street and calling out names. Actually, if you go on social media in Romania, you'd see that some people don't even bother to hide their names and say the most atrocious things, because let's put it this way, this kind of behavior, although against the law, is not a priority on the police's agenda, right? So either the society as a whole polices that, or companies do. And I've seen some great examples where people said some horrible things on social media in Romania, and then their employers immediately acted. However, it's really hard to believe that in Romania right now, there's proper accountability for the things said in the public space.
Yeah, I think that's an issue around the world. I mean, even in the UK, you look at how the trans community is being treated in the UK at the moment on social media and in real life, and it's an absolute tragedy. We absolutely are very clear about the expectations of our people in their public sphere, whatever that looks like, whether it's social media, whether it's our internal systems and structures. And like I said, in the first time, it might be about, we'll give people the benefit of the doubt and give them education and be very clear about our expectations. But if that then carries on, then we 100% would deal with that, because ultimately all of our workforce are our company's brand, and you can't be different internal to the organization and external to the organization. But you have to stay within the law as well, because I think there's nothing worse than those cases where companies have sacked someone and then it's been found to be unlawful. I think it's really unhelpful to the inclusion conversation. So you have to make sure you do it within the law.
Apologize, the alarm has gone on in my building. So of course, as faithful habit during our webinar, I will ask my next question and then mute myself. Claire, is it up to businesses to lead the way and then see change trickle down into society? or is it the other way around? Or are the two sides working together? Is it up to the legislator to set the rules? How do you see that that sort of balance in between the three sides?
So I think ideally it's a collaboration. You know, there are things that businesses can do, and definitely businesses can use, as Javier and George both said, businesses can use their soft power and their influencing power to nudge in the right direction. But absolutely, we should never take away from the amazing work that those grassroots civil society organizations do, and we should never try and replicate that. So I think it's about co-designing it together. Certainly, you know, I'm in London. I have very little understanding of what the lived experience in Romania is, or what the Romanian people would want. So it would be totally inappropriate for me to come from London and say, this is what you're doing. It should absolutely be a collaboration. And I think there's a really interesting conversation in the EU at the moment where organizations can work together to have one conversation, one voice, that kind of Javier was talking about earlier, the disconnect between the European conversation about we want to end discrimination, we want to be a more inclusive place, and the legal laws in most countries which seem to contradict that. And I think that's, rather than us all have individual conversations, it's better to amplify our voices. And if civil society can amplify what business is doing, and business can amplify what civil society is doing, then I think we'll all move forward quicker.
Well, we talked earlier about self-ID. What about just openly telling people about your orientation in the workplace, just being open about who you are? What are some of the challenges? Are people starting to be more comfortable about bringing what's now being called their full self to work? Of course, many people will say, well, this is not relevant. This is your private life. However, it's especially over the last year, we've seen that the two are now very intertwined. And not just that, while a company, of course, does not need an employee to be open about their sexual orientation, it would be nice to be able to, you know, speak your mind and have your partner with you at corporate events, etc., without that raising eyebrows. So where are we on that? And what can we do to make people feel more comfortable to just be who they are?
So I think in business, certainly in my experience, and I'd love to hear from the other panel members, you know, it takes time. No one wants to be the first, but when we start to drip feed, when we start to do it, people do. And I, you know, as a psychologist, I would defy you to find an organization where nobody talks about themselves. So when people say, what's my home life got to do with work? You know, just spend 5 minutes in any meeting, in any workplace. We all talk about work all the time, and we all talk about home all the time. That clear divide simply doesn't exist. So actually there's lots of research that talks about the increased performance of people when they can just be themselves and they're not covering and they're not hiding. And like you said, you know, my partner, I work is a big part of my life, and therefore when we go to work things, I absolutely want her to be part of that with me. So I think it takes time, and we need to create those safe spaces for people to tell their stories. But there's also little things like you'll see on my Zoom title, I've got my pronouns on there. At Vodafone, we encourage everyone to have their pronouns and how to pronounce their name, and any other information they want to tell us, whether they're dyslexic or something like that, on their email chains and in virtual meetings. And that just starts the conversation and helps people feel just that little bit safe to give more. Because once people start, everybody wants to share. There's very few people that don't.
Well, it normalizes things too, doesn't it? It's no longer odd that someone might have a different pronoun, because you know it's become part of the public space. And I guess the first step is talking about it and being open about it and being unapologetic about it, isn't it? So thank you for that, Claire. I'll go to Violeta Nenita, Country Manager, IKEA Romania. The progression of ED&I from an HR topic to a whole business practice, and case in point, you have a very interesting ad campaign, don't you? I've seen it on social media. Wonderful. Tell us a little bit about it and how people have reacted to it.
Yes, hello everybody. I think I was listening very carefully to the dialogue, and I was reflecting on how we at IKEA and here in Romania, we are securing the inclusive environment, because it's starting with this. And of course, I will answer to your particular question with our campaign, Love Exceeds Four Walls. I think it started with celebrating the Dahot. We also have raised the flag, the rainbow flag, to show our support for the LGBT plus community and also to advocate for them. In the same time, what we want with this campaign, of course, what people do in the home, in the four walls, I would say, intimate. It's not about that. It's about that love in whatever form it's happening between people. Needs the streets, we say, needs the nature, and people should feel free to express their love. So, and this is what it was about in our campaign. And I feel it was the first year that we really were vocal and advocate. And we have seen also good response from our people, our workers, because we wanted by this to connect not only with our community inside our organization, or our people, our workers, but also with outside, with the customer, with the society.
And what was the reaction? Because we talked about social media, and that's where some of the negative things happen, unfortunately. How did you feel about it? I love the campaign. I saw it independent from preparing for this webinar. It reached me on social media, and I actually looked at some of the comments, and it wasn't as bad as I expected. I think we're finally normalizing these conversations, and because so many of the big companies in Romania, congratulations, of course, for being a trailblazer, are doing these things now. It's no longer a shock to the system. It's okay, well, I've seen this before. This is now part of the public space, and therefore it's acceptable to have this, see this, and just live with it if nothing else, if not supported.
You are right. I mean, if you look on the response in social media, it was better than expected. I think it was really, really good. And also our response to the comments that were maybe criticizing or judging were exactly in this way, that actually we are for a more fair and equal world, which should be free from homophobia, transphobia, biphobia. And it's very important that when we share and we communicate with our workers, our customers, the society, we are actually advocating for equality. And and it's a human right, equality. We see, and if I connect to the business where you are, and I like how Claire was saying, practicing inclusion, we see that diversity then make really a great adding value to the business. Teams are performing better, our environment is better. And there are, of course, by not only communicating, and it's also action that you take, to secure this inclusive environment. But our response back to the media, to the positive, comments were of course great, and also to the ones which are not so positive. But as I said, very happy to see that there were much fewer. We also have answered with this inclusive and equality for a better world and the human rights.
How do you go from being diverse and inclusive to building better products and having better customer journeys?
I'm working for retail in IKEA for almost 5 years, but in IKEA in the Inga group for more than 10 years. And I always appreciated the environment where I can feel myself. I'm working, I'm contributing by being myself. I don't need to pretend. I don't need to be someone else. All the way that we are building and practicing and working in our business are securing that you feel yourself. So that, I think, it's a starting point. And that's why for us, the inclusive environment, it's a key. It's in our DNA. It's starting from the recruitment. It's starting from onboarding. It's starting from all the workshops that we have regularly here with our people. It's starting to deal with the bias that you might have. You are unconscious by having them. And we did a workshop among all our leaders regarding the bias training. And I think this was very important because you also discover you have some you're not aware of. And then by discussing with them, you are supported by behaving even better in an inclusive environment.
And how do you measure customer and employee sentiment within the minority groups and generally?
We are having, I was listening also carefully about those specific surveys. Every 6 months, every year, we are having every year a voice from our coworkers, where we are measuring ourselves as an employer from all points of view. We are also having some surveys connected to diversity, connected to the inclusion environment, and we are also listening to their open comments. And it's very happy to see that I think all the workers that we have are staying for the values, are staying with us, with the company, mainly for the values that we are having. And this is a very nice comment during the pandemic as well. By being myself working in IKEA, you know, I'm becoming also optimist about the future. So this, I think, it's also really a great comment to us.
Bucharest is, of course, at the forefront of these changes, but Romania is a big country. And I'm sure you have access to all sorts of data and information from outside of the capital. So how are we doing in that part of the country?
You know that we have an expansion plan as a company in Romania. Romania is a very important country for Inca Group. And we have a recent plan to come to Timișoara, close to Timișoara. We have also our pickup points in 5 other cities in Romania where we want to expand. The way we treat our customers, the way we treat our employees there are no different than what we do in Bucharest. I think also it's positive that we are also more connected with the society, more connected with different associations, companies to really advocate for what we believe is important for the society. I'm repeating at all times that equality is a human right, regardless, you know, of the age, ethnicity, race, gender, or sexuality. This is for us very, very important.
Well, if we were to look at some of the things that you are planning to do in Romania on this topic, let's say in the next in the short to medium term, could you name some of them, the things that you think the country still has to work on and that IKEA wants to be at the forefront of tackling?
Of course, being a global company, we have our plan of communication, our plan of campaigns. What we did this year, as we have financial years, you know, from September to September, we will repeat, and we'll have our pride in the campaigns, specifically connected to inclusiveness and also with LGBT+. It's a priority for us going forward and also for financial year 22. So we'll have campaigns. We will for sure connect with the society, with the already companies or associations that we are in connection, and we'll advocate. And also inside of our organization, as I said, it's important in all stages of developing people, from recruiting to retain and development of the educations, that we are having this part very strong.
Thank you so much, Violeta. Let's stay with IKEA. We were talking about the company being global and having a global approach. This is a good time for me to go to Ivan Jankovic of IKEA. I'm sorry, the alarm is going off again. As I said, the fatal habit, it hasn't happened before or after. So I will ask my question and quickly mute myself. Ivan, the global approach to LGBTQ+ inclusion. Talk to us about that, please.
Thank you, Andrea. I'll share about the global program of inclusion at IKEA and how we do it, but I just want to share that, and I want to reflect and connect to the things that have been said up until now. It maybe also help us to answer this question. I really love what George presented and the research that has been done around this on how is this good for the businesses. How the LGBT+ inclusion is good for the businesses. And I also want to connect with what Violeta shared. For us at IKEA, we are aware it's good for the business. The diversity brings on quality in terms of themes, creativity, production, and so on. But let's not forget that equal treatment, equal opportunities, the right to be heard or seen is a basic human right. And human rights are universal, and as such, all people around the world should claim them. And this is a base point. This is a base start for IKEA. I would also like to connect upon, and I really loved what Javier shared in terms of the self-ID surveys, and I'm really happy to hear that different companies, different organizations are doing this in order to know the population inside, but also to, since it's anonymous, also to provide a safe space where people can identify themselves, share, raise a concern. I really love what gets measured, gets managed, or gets done. It's a necessity for us to know how to do it. And also, like Violetta shared, we do it once a year. Our ways of collecting co-worker satisfaction or co-worker input is evolving also. And I can share what has been done, let's say, when it comes to this type of survey in Southeast Europe, particularly in Romania. When we ask this kind of question towards the co-worker base, we always like to see how does it connect and how does it compare to, let's say, a question of how do you feel inside your team, in specifically directed to the LGBT plus community and those that are not, and then we compare. We also had a few insights, particularly in Southeast Europe, and Romania is not hugely different than, let's say, Serbia and Croatia, this part of the world when it comes to this topic. What we've learned is in our region, we've learned through asking through this type of survey that LGBT plus community believes that we should be more active inside, internally, and as a response to that, and I'm connected to what Claire shared, it's not just about measuring, it's about how do you respond to the numbers that you get out there. We have an action plan for the next couple of years. It's mostly connected to what we're going to do internally for our co-workers based on the inputs that I shared. And it's connected to the resource, creating a resource groups. I know resource groups are popular and really giving results in different companies around the world. We didn't have them before, but now we are formalizing them. And I think this is also where we're receiving a very good response for the co-workers on the idea that they are being formed. So we want to create an independent body inside to respond to these kind of to this topic inside the organization. Andrea, in just a couple of minutes more, I'm going to share on the
of course, please,
inclusion globally and what it is for us, because every country is different, every market is different, and by listening to Claire, by listening to Javier, and also by speaking to my global community, we're facing different issues, but it's good to have a plan, and good to have base and in which we base actions. For us, when it comes to LGBT plus inclusion, it's done in 4 ways, I could say. Number 1 is values. We are value-driven company, I can say, and if I compare us to other companies, I can also say that we are very vocal internally about our values. And as Claire shared, values are nothing if they're not reflected into behaviors. So therefore, what we do, we ensure that our values live in everything we do. And for us, the idea of diversity and inclusion and equal treatment is embedded into our values. So this also helps the total picture of LGBT plus inclusion. The second layer is building individual competencies on the LGBT plus, because for us, let's say, speaking from the region of Southeast Europe, the base emotion when we speak about the topic is fear of the unknown, fear that the things will change. Then for us, it is how do we respond to the emotion of fear by providing knowledge, information. How do we share and then educate with different trainings around the LGBT plus. On one side, this is what also has been mentioned today, is the inclusive glossary, the pronouns and the things. How do we how do we speak to each other in an inclusive way? The third layer is emotional intelligence or empathy, and how do we work with it? So through a set of trainings that we have, not just for the leaders, but also for all the co-workers, we're tackling the biases, we're tackling prejudices, we're tackling things, how it is to be in someone else's shoes, and looking into things that are granted for you potentially. It really helps us into including different perspectives into everyday life. And then the fourth and the last one is creating inclusive systems. This is the big line, but I can share from the perspective of, let's say, benefits of the co-workers in the organization, particularly coming from countries where legally same-sex partnerships are not recognized. How do we provide same, let's say, benefit treatment for the co-workers, particularly speaking about the benefits of being a parent or benefits targeting your family? So the definition of a family inside a company, and how do we secure that we provide the same set of benefits regardless of what is legally recognized?
Thank you for that, Ivan. And how do you do that? How do you navigate those social and legal boundaries sometimes? And how do you make sure that nobody feels like someone is getting a special treatment in the company? Because of course, some communities, some minorities need a lot more support. And some of the things we've noticed in looking at, for example, minorities with disability or people with long-term health issues, is that anytime a company makes certain adjustments, there's the occasional other employee who says, well, why is someone getting a day off, or why is someone getting something special? Let's put it this way. Is that an issue? Have you seen that? And how do you tackle the legal challenges in countries where, exactly as you said, the LGBTQ plus rights haven't actually caught up with reality from a legal perspective?
I get the point. It's I'll start with the legal frame and how do we face it. Sometimes it's, and I hate when we as organization are facing the administrative wall, and we faced it a couple of times, particularly in granting work permits for the partners of our co-workers that are joining from different countries. And we always, like, I can share that we successfully managed to do so far and respond to all the issues, but it's always an extra task. And this is why we are also siding with the different organization to ask for policy changes, for law changes wherever possible, because it's also embedded in our values, but it's also reflect the issues of our co-workers. And when you say internal, from the aspect of internal righteousness or equal treatment of all the groups, we haven't had any issues to speak from that perspective. Why are we granting certain thing to certain group of people? You could easily take the stand that, like, why people who have families have different set of benefits. But what basically we are trying to do is also listen to our co-workers. What do they find important? What do they believe is the right thing to go for? And then trying to make those rules applicable to each and every one.
And how do you reconcile these global approaches with the local cultures? Because again, we talked about Romania, and while again, I will absolutely admit that Romania has made so much progress, there's still so much work to do, and it's, I assume, quite difficult to go in and say, well, right, things are going to be this way from now on, because you need to get people to work with you rather than feel taken aback. These conversations can be quite difficult. People can feel on the edge, or they might not even know how to handle certain sensitive topics. So how do you how do you bring those things from a global perspective into a local culture?
Yeah. It's good to share that at least in IKEA, what I personally also believe in is LGBT plus inclusion topic is not treated differently than any other inclusion element. When we speak about gender, when we speak about people with disabilities, when we speak about nationalities, ethnicities, it's an element of the array that we're pushing for. Speaking about the global or local perspective, I can share this. Ever since I joined IKEA, I'm aware that every year on the global level, we are creating a campaign for IDAHOT. And every year, I know there is a forum discussing, should we do it in Southeast Europe? Can we do it locally in Romania, Serbia, Croatia, Ukraine, Slovenia, etc.? And then it has never been a right moment. And I remember that we've done even some localized campaigns. And this year, when we speak about IDAHOT campaign, Violetta mentioned it, you asked about it on the social media. We've done a localized campaign to answer what is basically an issue when it comes to perceiving LGBT topic. It's okay within 4 walls, and it's, let's say, an element which is present in this part of Europe. Well, love doesn't know 4 walls, and this is why that we use this sentence. And I'm super proud that we've reached the momentum until we can go external rather than just speaking about it internally or in separate forums. And when you asked Violetta what will be the next steps, for sure we will continue to work internally on it, but in the future we also would like to be even stronger in putting this message out, not just for the IDAHOT, but also throughout the year, and be recognized as not just as an inclusive employer, not just as a brand that is advocating for LGBT+, but generally a company that is a good neighbor and fighting for what is right.
Thank you so much, Ivan. As always, a pleasure to discuss diversity and inclusion with you. I will now go to Mihaela Davis. Thank you so much for stepping in for Javier and having the patience to bear with us a little bit. I want to go back a little bit to the topic of data, because now you've seen a wider approach to it, and I'm very interested in how things are going in Romania, how comfortable people are. I've asked this question before, but Javier answered it from a global perspective. I'd very much like to get your take on it. In Romania, how open are people? How likely are they to disclose their orientation or any other sort of personal choices for that matter? Where are we now, and where do we still need to do some work?
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. In Romania, there are some employees in Accenture that feel comfortable to bring, we have an expression, bring yourself, your better self, authentic self at work every day, so you can be even more productive. And we do have a few colleagues who feel comfortable in doing so. I would say not so much from the leadership, as it relates to the self-ID program. We are not able to, as Javier mentioned, because of the GDPR, because of the law, we are not able to implement that program that is implemented by Accenture globally in so many other countries. So that's where we stand in terms of data. But at Accenture Romania, we do have a large number of LGBTQI plus allies, and that makes things so much easier and better for our employees who identify as being part of the community.
And you feel that within the business environment in Romania, I mean, I'm sure you talk to your peers in other companies. Can you give us an idea, if you've discussed these things, are they seeing progress in terms of people being honest about their personal lives, about their personal choices, about their orientation? You are a trailblazer in Accenture, and I've spoken to more of your colleagues in terms of equality, diversity, and inclusion, but I'm quite curious where we are in terms of the wider business environment, and not just at the top, because as we can pretty much understand, a local branch of a big company will get its cues from the global at a global level, and then adapt to the local market. However, the small and medium enterprises in Romania don't have that luxury. They don't have someone showing them the way. So where are we in that sort of segment of the business world?
Unfortunately, there hasn't been much discussion around that. So I wouldn't say that I had a discussion with somebody from Vodafone, for example, who is in charge of the Pride network globally. I'm not aware that that exists. So I'm the Pride lead here in Romania for Accenture. I have been having these discussions with Lesta, and we kind of, get the trend from each other. But just to say, I know a lot of companies are activating in this space, creating more awareness that we need so much here in Romania. I have been an activist for the LGBT community, and part of the first Pride parade in 2005. I actually walked the streets there. So I have known the community back then. I have seen and kind of taken the pulse on how things stand right now. And as you said, Andrea, earlier, we have made so much progress thanks to our partners. Accept is also on the line, and we're supporting them. So that's the first step that companies need to do: support nonprofits to activate in this space that are actually pushing the agenda and making the change in the legislation. Because let's be fair, we need to give the LGBTQI people the equal rights that they deserve and they so much need in a country like Romania in 2021, right? So I wish we start more of a conversation with other companies that are part of this panel, and moreover partners of the RDCC, and unite forces and push the agenda forward.
Well, you said something very, very important. Taking part of events such as the Pride Parade really is that important, very important, isn't it? Practice what you preach, show the support. Do you feel that your colleagues and your peers from other companies are comfortable participating in events like that? Do they show up for their colleagues in support of the things that they're going through?
I did see that at Accenture. We were part of the parade in Bucharest 2018 and 2019, supporting with quite large number of people, allies, as well as people from the community came with their families and their kids and marched along the streets there. But we did see other companies that I wouldn't name here, that were part of the parade and are, as I know, supporting Theo at Accept. But it's also very important to understand that Romania is not represented only by Bucharest, right? There are LGBT communities that we need to take in account and refer to when we think about making a difference. There are big centers of LGBT communities where we do have offices. Accenture has offices like Brașov, Cluj, that we are gearing our attention to. So we have expanded our networks there, getting more allies, training our employees to be more inclusive in the workplace. And we are planning to participate in the parade that hopefully will happen in Cluj this year.
Thank you so much. That would be a lovely event to share. hopefully, if the pandemic allows it, more and more people will take part. Thank you so much, Mihaela. I want to go to Leo now, and I will end with Theodora, because I would like some of her conclusions based on everything she's heard today, her input from the ground, because I think she might have a slightly different perspective to some of the things we've heard. But on to Leo. Leo, this incredible talent pool isn't always tapped into, and it could bring so much to a company. How do we do better? We also mentioned at the beginning some good practices, some examples. I want to hear that from you. There's so many things that that the HR expert can talk about. So why don't you talk us through a little bit what's going on, what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and then we'll go into some more specific topics.
Perfect. Thank you very much. First of all, congrats for this webinar. Well done, Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce. And I'm very glad to be here, to be present at the first event of this kind. And I hope will be more of this. I have to say that more than 30% from digital generation, meaning the persons under 25, they didn't say I'm straight. So they identify themselves with other things. They will choose their employer. Right, it's happening right now because it's a market of the candidates, it's not a market of the companies. So these guys will choose an environment, not a company to work for, but an environment where he, like individual, will put his mind and will work and will develop themselves. So imagine if you are not embracing diversity and inclusion, you will lose this pipeline of 34% from our data from this kind of people. So they will not identify with you as an employer. So this is, I think, the most important message that the Romanian Chamber of Commerce have to say to the bigger employers in Romania. After that, I'm working with HR departments. So HR departments evolved side by side with employees from organization, because diversity involves creating an open environment to different experiences and perspectives of the workforce for attract and not only to remain and to retain talent and remain competitive in the industries they activate. So the usefulness of diversity training programs for HR people, and I will say step one, and after that I will say the step two also, to address all the unique things about employees: race, color, ethnicity, language, nationality, sexual orientation, religion, whatever. They can create a truly inclusive work environment and can streamline processes and how employees work together. I said step one is the HR because they are the HR department. It's designing and also implementing the strategy and the processes. But most important are hiring managers, are the top management of the companies, the board of the companies, and also even the team leaders. Every kind of and every level of management, it's very important to participate to this kind of trainings that Ivan told us, that Claire from Vodafone told us, that Mihaela from Accenture told us. So these kind of trainings, workshops, and I'm sure, and I know, and I'm not just sure, that Lestat and Theo are working on some trainings and workshops in order to help organization, because yes, IKEA, it's a multinational, it comes from the headquarters with a strategy, so on and so forth, but not all the companies have this. So the Romanian Chamber of Commerce can help the companies in order to implement this kind of workshop, this kind of trainings that are very, very necessary right now. And diversity is no longer plays an important role only for those directly involved, but for all of us as a society and for organization alike, because it helps us understand different perspectives in the world in which we live, and to consider personal prejudices about different groups, and to reorganize and respect ways of being that are not necessarily ours. In other words, diversity educates us in the spirit of tolerance and teach us that we can be better. So many people, as well as employees, as teams of people working together. So this is right now what it's in a nutshell. And globally, companies in which diversity is a component, companies with higher levels of gender and ethnic diversity have been more performance than companies that not embrace the inclusive policies. In this regard, the last known percentage is about 35% more performant than companies who are not embracing diversity and inclusion policies. So this is basically, please.
Why is that? Simple question. Why are they more performant?
Yes, because Claire and Ivan and Michaela said already, people will choose their employer in order to feel like I am, not to pretend to be somebody else. And if, as I said, from digital generation, meaning that under 25% as an age, they said, I'm not straight, 30 and 4% of those people said, I'm not straight, they will choose their employer. They will choose the place, the workplace where he develop themselves, where he want to work, where he put his idea in order to move all the good things and the projects in the companies. So if you are feeling yourself well in an environment, of course you are more performant. Of course you brings ideas on the table. Of course you put and implement and you put all the efforts in order to move things forward. If not, you're just an employee who expect the salary at the end of the month, who work 8 hours per day. And we know in Romania, I think 99% of the people are disappointed and they are disengaged about the work employer and blah, blah, blah. But if you are feeling good part of the company and of the culture, you are one of them. And this is the most important thing in order to be more performant.
So some companies understand that, as we said earlier, it's good for business to be diverse and inclusive. Some don't. So for those who do not understand that or are putting this at the top of their priorities, what's the solution? Are quotas the solution? And how do you manage that process successfully to make sure that you get the right people in to interview, right? Before the bias starts, before, there's an HR employee who just sort of dismisses someone because they just don't fit their pattern of whatever they think they should have in the company. And that is a problem, isn't it, if we're honest? Because, the leaders might want to, from the top, have a certain policy. However, if the people doing the recruitment on the ground are still trapped in their biases, then, you're not going to be very successful, or not very soon, right? So how do you manage that process?
Indeed, even if you pass from the HR, because HR is more open-minded, you don't pass the interview by the hiring managers who have their own biases and their own ideas and their own opinions. That's why I'm saying it's not just the HR, because HR can embrace, it's about people, it's about culture, it's fine. Should be also with the hiring managers who are taking the decision who is hiring and when and how and so on and so forth. So it's not just the HR. First of all, in my opinion, the message, for example, congrats IKEA for the campaign, it really touched me. And it was amazing that people educated in Romania receive it, smile it, said, that's why I love IKEA. I receive it lots of messages. Look at that. That's why I love IKEA. I didn't know it's not just about the products, it's also about the way they are thinking and they are doing things. Yes, that's great. So those companies who don't embrace already some diversion and inclusion strategies should see the bigger names, because all of us, we are looking and we are learning from the books, and we are seeing the idols in each industry, how they are doing. So I think it should be a good example of this. And the Accept and RDCC should send more messages and be more vocal about the potential that the LGBT or whatever kind of people can have, and what means for the companies the loss of these high potential people, because candidates on the market, because they are talents in every way, from blue collars, operations, handlers, so on and so forth, till top management.
And back to the first part of my question, are quotas a solution? Mandatory quotas?
Well, with baby steps, yes, small baby steps, but it should start to be more communicated and to see the bright side of doing things like this.
So it's more about education and getting people on board rather than making things mandatory.
Of course.
Is in terms of time, does that always work? Especially in a country where, you know, I don't want to bring sort of the influence of religion, but it has been quoted as one of the main issues when dealing with LGBTQ inclusion. And again, I don't want to open that particular can of worms, but education may take a long time, especially with the older generations. So how do you manage that?
Rome wasn't built in a day, so of course we'll do the baby steps in this also. And they were did before. Imagine that I saw 20 years ago that article was not in the legislation anymore, the 200 article. So baby steps were done. Already somebody broke the ice with the rainbow flag, with the rainbow logos, with campaigns like IKEA, for example, what Accenture did to the prides, and I know they were there 2018 and 2019. So little broke of the ice happened. I'm sure like all the others with trainings, with digitalization, with all the trends, this one will be also on the wave, but with baby steps.
So we need trailblazers and we need role models.
And patience.
It's brilliant. Thank you so much. Now on to Teodora Rossetti of Accept. You've heard a lot of things today, and we try to keep it as positive as possible because we do want to focus on the positive steps that we've seen, and we've definitely seen them over the last 10, 15 years. However, your reality on the ground might be slightly different because you see a lot of things day to day. So I'm curious about your perspective on where Romania is. Tell us what you think about what you've heard today. Tell us whether we are as advanced as we think we are, and maybe tell us where there's very important work to be done, maybe in relation to what the other speaker said.
Well, I am generally an optimist, a positive person, and I think this is something we can easily apply to how much the business environment has grown and influenced how they can engage with authorities and with the LGBT community in Romania. I have started working with Accept, I think, in 2013. And I've seen the Pride movement grow from a march of 1,000 people to an event that reunites at least 10,000 people every year. I think we have tried many times to get employers on our side marching with us at Pride while I was in the team, even before. And I think it happened the first time in 2016. So it's absolutely amazing to see how fast, how soon, how meaningful mobilization and solidarity can be built and can be grown. And I'm really grateful, in the end, that everybody who's part of this conversation has had a significant role in mobilizing people together for the sake of LGBT equality in Romania. That being said, of course, there is a lot of room to grow, but that's an opportunity and a challenge. It's not something that we should dread. A meaningful example is, your ability to come out at work. We have done a recent study on how people perceive same-sex marriage, same-sex families in Romania, LGBT people in general. And the study launched in April. I'm going to also leave the link to it in the chat following my intervention. Shows something very important. Only 19% of Romanians say they know somebody who's LGBT, either from their immediate circle, meaning family, work, friends, former school colleagues, or from TV. So that's an incredibly low number, but I think it's something quite accurate, because even if you might know a personality, you might not actively think about their sexual orientation or gender identity, right? You might not immediately understand their sexual orientation is part of who they are, oftentimes a meaningful part.
Sorry, can I ask a question, Theo?
Sure, sure.
Is that because people don't actually come out? Because it's really hard to believe that there's so few people in each of our social circles that are part of that community. So it's because people aren't coming out.
Exactly. So most people don't know somebody who's LGBT because people who are close to them, who can have those meaningful conversations, aren't out. And part of that reason is how difficult it remains to be out in the workplace in Romania, especially so in smaller communities, in rural communities, where maybe large companies don't necessarily have offices and employee. Or even worse, if you are an employee of the Romanian state in its variety of roles, be it in a hospital, in a public school, anywhere really. We've seen in our interactions with the community that the most discrimination claims that are related to the workplace are actually occurring in places where the state is an employer, not necessarily where private businesses are. Because as opposed to how human resources complaints are handled in the public system, often straight through litigation, companies have internal means of managing this type of situations, having the important conversations, allotting resources to training, getting better advice from somewhere else. Not from somebody who's still in Romania, who might have the same homophobic views as those who are perpetrating discrimination. As such, creating the safe spaces, creating those environments where coming out is simply a part of life. It's something just natural that can occur, is something that people can simply do without being so concerned about its impact, about how this is going to affect their potential career track or their opportunities, is something absolutely wonderful. And all the companies present here in this conversation have been building spaces that allow this to happen, have been engaging with us, supporting Pride events, supporting meaningful conversations like this one to occur. And I cannot, just emphasize enough how much structure is very important. A structure like the Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce that creates these spaces where conversations can go deeper. It's easy to make statements. It's easy to, it's increasingly easier to have a rainbow logo. Often we see that this is not enough. We need action in order to advance LGBT equality, especially when the business environment is quite often more proactive on the topic of LGBT equality than policymakers are. When policymakers are resisting granting the necessary and the very relevant protections for the Romanian LGBT community and communities across the space. We have seen many challenges for LGBT equality in Romania, in Bulgaria, in Poland, in Hungary. Many of them are, very prominent. And the LGBT community in Romania has been the target of a hate campaign around the 2018 referendum that lasted for 3 years. The amount of pressure was absolutely insane. Many people that come to our association were saying, if this ever passes, I'm going to leave the country. I'm going to leave the country for good. I already stayed here for way too long because I expected rights to be granted. I expected change to occur. And what we see really is that society, companies, employers, artists, many types of allies, civil society in general is changing a lot faster than politicians are changing and willing to understand. And they're gonna unavoidably catch up to this lag because society is changing. The same study I mentioned shows that already more than 50% of Romanian youth, people aged 18 to 35, agree to protecting same-sex families either through marriage or civil partnership. So things are changing really fast, are changing hopefully in our lifetime, because people, have a day-to-day life and can't wait forever for change to organically occur. We're litigating in the European Courts of Human Rights to gain equal marriage. But what we really need to do is have more of these meaningful conversations, to bring more businesses around the table, to bring more people who are experts in HR, like Leo here, to discuss how we can be better, and to obviously get more people like George at the table who can analyze and discuss impact of discrimination with the type of expertise they bring. And last but not least, we need to mention also the amount of support sometimes a company can provide simply by helping us with the expertise and the knowledge that they have. Besides the financial support we often get from companies that engage with us, an example being Accenture, that helped us provide services to HIV positive people who are part of the LGBT community. We can also benefit a lot from support in kind. And I cannot emphasize enough how much Dentons, who also holds the leading, who's also chairing the Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce, has been providing, except with not, in one instance, but for many years now already, in our international litigation for marriage and family equality.
Thank you so much, Theo. So you've raised some important points. We've seen a lot of progress, but we've also seen instances of eroding LGBTQ plus rights, or threatening instances where we almost went backwards for a while. And yes, I remember very well the societal outcry during when we were getting close to that very controversial vote, and you had people that were extreme on the one side, and then you had the people who saw this as this is what society needs to be, and there was no way to meet in the middle. There was no way to get the people who were so set in their ways to listen. So in a way, it is a good thing that common sense prevailed, because I can't even imagine what Romania would look like right now for this segment's rights if that vote had gone the other way. So if we look at the short to medium term, what do you see as the main challenges the country will be faced in the business sector and beyond that, the things that companies and society have to tackle from now on?
Oh, this is a tough question. In terms of LGBT equality, I think it will become increasingly difficult and challenging to strive, to ensure full equality for your employees when there are still very basic things lacking in the law. And one particular point I can mention is legal gender recognition. There's this anti-gender debate across Europe right now, showing its ugly head in a variety of countries that you would not even expect this debate to occur. Of course, one of them is the UK, as Claire mentioned before, but there are many issues affecting the labor unions, affecting employers, affecting labor policies in Portugal, in Spain, in France. In Romania, we estimate there's a large trans community that has very precarious access to the labor market, simply because discrimination doesn't, start when you want to get your first job. When you're trans, you have to face challenges in education, you face challenges with getting family support and finishing your study. You are bullied at school. You often, at least in Romania, don't have the opportunity to get support from school counselors or the system itself. So obviously the trans community is quite affected by challenges in getting work, in getting meaningful work. What is challenging for employers, for instance, is to really hire a trans person and respect their identity. Legal gender recognition is so difficult in Romania that people need to go to court, often spend years at the scrutiny of a judge, get a number of medical opinions that are quite invasive, even be the subject of a social inquest done by authorities who have the right to ask your friends and families and coworkers things about you, invade your private life, and even evaluate if you have a gender appropriate role in your work or company, which I have no idea what that may be, but it shows you how embedded and ingrained prejudice is around gender in Romania, especially when authorities look at those issues. One other side is the huge public pressure that is being created around trans people and the anti-trans movement. And this is often translated into legislation, as in the recent case of Hungary, but also in the case of Romania last year. Last year, we were able to repeal in the Constitutional Court, with the support of Dentons, such a bill that banned much of our activity, right? Banned us from discussing gender and trans people, not only in schools and universities, but also in professional trainings. So that would have been a piece of legislation that severely would have affected all of our work around diversity and inclusion. There we saw, thankfully, the type of solidarity we need to see from now on. Solidarity among civil society organizations, among student organizations, academics, and people who have a stake in this issue. And the Constitutional Court reacted very positively by saying this bill is unconstitutional, especially when seeing that people come together and defend the principle. Academic freedom is something very important that needs to be kept in the minds of all who regulate the educational system, but also the fact that you cannot deny, just because you want to, the existence of real people and of real issues we currently face in the work environments, all issues that are related to gender. As such, I think this debate is not necessarily gone simply because we have a Constitutional Court decision. I think the debate is going to become more and more preeminent. And as there is more information available, as trans people gain better access to employment, we're likely to see companies being challenged by issues around gender. By maybe, I don't know, company locker rooms, and what do you do about the badge? How do you go about the, the official documents, the name tag? So I think this is, another place where companies are already ahead of time compared to Romanian authorities. We have seen many companies decide to acknowledge the true name and gender of the person in front of them, whereas Romania has been sentenced by the European Court of Human Rights only this year in January of breaching Article 8, the respect for private life in the case of trans people, by the unclear and burdensome legal gender recognition procedures that we have in the country right now.
Thank you so much, Theodora. This is a very realistic view of where we are right now. So great progress, great work to be done. I'll quickly go to Lestat Moreau again, the founder and the board member of the Romanian Diversity Chamber of Commerce. Give us a few conclusions. Lestat, please.
I think, Andrea, this conference was a great initiation for our audience to a topic that most of the time is not really approached in most of the companies in Romania, because they consider it's too difficult, because it's not suitable for the society, etc. But I think our partners at the Diversity Chamber of Commerce from Vodafone, IKEA, and also Accenture demonstrated today that it is possible. Inclusion is the way to innovation. It's the way to profit. It's the way to a better society. By joining the chamber, more companies will have the potential, the possibility to be next to them, to learn from their initiatives, to learn from their leadership, but also to learn from our task force that we're creating. We're creating one on LGBTQ plus at the workplace. I think IKEA is gonna participate. Also, Accenture is gonna participate. I believe we will also have Vodafone. It's a great opportunity for smaller companies, or for companies that don't have a specific policy in place to come and start something. To join us around the table is the way to go. Well, thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you so much. We've come to the end of our webinar. A brilliant conversation as always. We've had some fantastic speakers and trailblazers. I really want to continue to use that word, because you are fantastic. You are changing the way a whole country is approaching business. So thank you for that from all of us. I will go over the room again. We've had George Perlov from Open for Business, Ivan Jankovic and Violeta Neniță from IKEA Romania, Claire Harvey from Vodafone Group, and Javier Leonor Vicente from Accenture, I apologize, the two of Claire and Javier have had to leave. We still have Mihaela Davis from Accenture here with us. We've had Leonard Vizoiu from Leo HR and Teodora Rossetti from Accent Romania. Thank you for joining us, and the attendees too. You will find a number of articles based on this webinar on the RDCC website, which is rdcc.ro, and on our social media. If we didn't get to, if you didn't have your questions answered, feel free to get in touch with us. We will liaise with our speakers and publish their answers on our website. You will also receive a newsletter with highlights from this webinar over the next few days. Until next time, until our next webinar, thank you and stay safe.